Thanks everyone. Hello. Thanks for joining. Thanks for the nice introduction. That pretty much summed it up already perfectly. So this talk is about how to deal with a stress situation when you're a development studio and you have, in a conflict with a publisher. Maybe your milestone is delayed, or maybe he's just not paying, though you were delivered on time. We're going to split that up into, first we're going to introduce ourselves briefly, and then we kind of talk about what to do, or first of all, we look into why conflicts can occur at all. So what are these typical things where something can go wrong? Then we talk about mitigating measures, mitigating actions, what you can do up front so that those situations simply do not occur. And the last part then will deal with, okay, if everything has gone wrong and you're now in the middle of maybe it gets really tough and you're supposed to need to go to court or whatever, how to react in these kind of situations. So, as I said, we're going to start with a little introduction. So my name is Ralf Adam. I'm from Germany. I'm in the industry for more than 25 years now. Started back in PC, or it was even Amiga game development and PC. And during the 25 years, I spent most of the time, I started as a coder, then did some game design, but most of the time I worked in production. So either as an internal project manager, producer, I was VP production at Gameforge for a while. And for nearly half of the time, I actually worked as a freelancer, which I'm also doing now for more than 3 years again. So together with my lovely fiancée Vera, we're both freelance consultant and producers, and we work both for publishers and development studios.
Thank you, Ralf. Hello, everybody. My name, as Ralf said already, is Vera Frisch. I'm also from Germany. I'm for more than 10 years in the industry now. I have a strong background on the business side because I've studied business administration, and my core expertise is project management, producing, and also product management.
And these are some of the latest games we worked on. So lately we did a lot of free-to-play mobile games. There's also one PC among them. So interestingly, though we're from Germany, most of our clients are all over the world. We work with Nitro Games in Finland. We have a studio in Chile, actually, in South America we're working with. So that also means a lot of traveling, but we really like that. So we're really on the road most of the time. Some of our clients, recent clients, past clients, you get the impression. So as I said, we want to start with looking into how actually conflicts can occur, or whether they can occur, and what are minefields or traps you could walk into. So a typical thing is that you sign a deal with a publisher and everything's great, and I mean the sky is full of pink clouds and unicorns, but suddenly your main contact there changes. You had a great producer at the publisher, but he's leaving, and now you've got a new producer and he says, no, I want the game completely to be different or whatever. These things can happen all the time, and you need to very often deal with that, especially if you have longer projects going for more than a year or something like that. The strategy of your partner could actually change. So you've signed with a publisher a free-to-play mobile game, and he suddenly says, mobile is dead, I just want to make a VR game, so whatever, can we change your game concept? Feature changes, a typical thing, you agreed on something during pre-production, how the game should look like, what kind of feature set it should have, and during the production, suddenly the publisher asks you, but this feature, I actually don't want it pink, but I want it red. I want this to be totally different, and if I click on this button, this should happen instead of what we originally discussed. And feature change, like other things, and we're going to look into that into more detail, always mean change of plan, and that usually always mean change of budget, change of timeline, and stuff like that. And so while the publisher is very fast, or might be very fast with saying, I want that change, as soon as you say, but this is going to cost you more, he will be like, no, this needs to stay within the budget. No extra budget, no extra time. New features, even worse. Publisher says, yes, we agreed to scope. We have a design document that was greenlit at the end of pre-production, but I want extra feature, X, Y, Z. But obviously, and of course, no more budget, no more extra time for that. You just need to squeeze it in somehow into the existing budget. Milestone rejection. So you delivered everything that was agreed to at a certain milestone, at a certain month, and the publisher says, look, I had a completely different understanding of what I was getting, and this is not what I want, and I'm not going to greenlight your milestone. And usually this is also linked to payment. changed release planning. The publisher said, yeah, we agreed to have it, I don't know, first quarter of 2020, but now I need it second quarter of 2019 because there's we need to fill some gaps in our, I don't know, quarterly release plan or whatever. Request of kind of like extras for free. So these are these typical things that the publisher suddenly comes and says, you know what, we forgot about it, but there's actually a free coming around and we need a huge high-res trailer, at least 2 minutes, ba-bam. Again, obviously not for any extra money or anything like that, but just please do it. And always with this kind of like sense, it's also in your interest because you want us to make the best for your game, so please deliver all of these things for free. I know you've all never heard that, I've never been in the situation, you're all lucky developers, so happy you. A deal with a publisher usually is, yes, you get money, you develop the game, but the publisher also obviously has obligations. I just named some, like PR, marketing, all that kind of stuff, putting your box in the shelf if you're working on a box game, making user acquisition if you're making a mobile game, whatever. And sometimes publishers are kind of like reluctant to actually fulfill their part of the bargain. But obviously, it's not always the publisher. I mean, game development is game development. You might be late with a delivery. You might miss a milestone. Things like that also can happen. So what to do then? And last but not least, a delay of payment can also happen. So even the milestone is approved, publishers say, yeah, everything's fine, check is in the post, and you wait for, I don't know, 4 weeks and still no money on your bank account. That might be also very fast put you into kind of like a crisis situation. By the way, one thing, the clock is not ticking. I don't know whether this is important or not, but I still have 60 minutes, which I appreciate. Okay, so as I said, those were kind of like typical causes of conflict. And now we want to look into what you can do from the very start, maybe before you have even signed with a publisher, what you can do on your end to avoid that actually some of these crises happening, or if they are happening, that you're well prepared to kind of like stand your ground. These are the 5 kind of like topics we're looking into. So and these are also in a chronological order, as you can see. It starts with a studio strategy, then the pitch, then the contract, then the planning, and then the collaboration with your partner, with your publisher. I was saying publisher, it might be an investor or a co-publisher or whatever. This is really about partnerships. And so the first thing that I want to talk a little and very briefly about it, because this is actually a topic for a 2 days workshop, is studio strategy. So I just want to give you a glimpse on what that means and what it kind of embraces. But you should really look into that. And this, like I said, this is actually the first thing you should do. It's not good to talk with a publisher about a potential pitch or a potential game you want to build for him if you don't even know whether this is the genre you want to be with your studio or the platform or whatever. So studio, or to build a studio strategy, you basically have kind of like 4 pillars you have to look into. The first one is the mission, vision, and value pillar. So the mission is, what do you want to stand for as a as a developer? What is this that we think we should build our company around? The vision is, what are our goals? Where do we want to be in 2 years, 5 years? The values is obviously, what are the core values of our company, how we want to work together as a company and get to these goals. The next pillar, and like in a game development, actually you could kind of like translate that. This would be in game development, you could say the pitch phase. So then you go into the next phase. This is analyzing your actual condition. You can do that by these kind of like SWOT analysis. If you already have a team, ask everyone what they think, what you as a team should do, what kind of genres, what kind of platform, whatever, how you want to work together with, how big your studio should be like maybe in 2-5 years. Do you have an exit strategy? Do you want to maybe sell your studio in the long run? All these things should first go into an analyzing what your current condition is, and then kind of like defining from there what your strategic goals are and where you want to go to. And this would be like, again, similar in game production. This would, you could say, would be kind of like the pre-production of your studio strategy. And then obviously you have the execution. And usually where many teams fail is actually they go until here and then they just don't execute. They just don't derive the actual measures out of their strategy or out of their objectives they created, and then nothing happens and they wonder why. So this would be then actually the production. And why is it so important to have such a studio strategy? Because if you don't have one, and this talk is about having a crisis with the publisher, how do you want to react in a crisis situation if you actually don't know what is important for your studio? What is the plan for where you want to be in 2 years, 5 years? Is the money the most important thing? Is it the IP you're looking for in terms of when it gets to court? So to be prepared for crisis situation, you first of all need to know where you want to go with you and your team. And
the
I
next
pass along.
topic is mine. It's pitching, and I know all of you are very creative people, and there might be some in the room who are saying, nah, pitching, that's not really my taste. I do it because it's a necessity, but overall, maybe a couple of guys are having the feeling in the development industry, okay, when I have found a partner, I'm settled and I can relax for the next 2 years. And this is one of the biggest mistakes you can do, because negotiations take easily up to 6 and 9 months. And if you wait, for example, for 2 years until you need a new partner, it might also be that people you have talked to in the past are already moved on to another partner, and you basically have to rebuild your network every time again. So overall, one of the important things is always be there, do networking, and also talk to your partners regularly and be up to date where they're moving on if you're looking for publishers or investors or somebody like this. The next big topic is the contract itself. Because contract, this is a business topic, and many people think, okay, maybe we can keep it loose and it's for our advantage if not everything is in detail, especially from the developer side, because overall it means in dubio pro reo, which is Latin and basically means when it's in doubt, it's for the accrued. But overall, the publisher or the investor is on the steering wheel, because going to court take a long time, a long period, maybe up to many years. The publisher has the money to do so. But for the developers, maybe it's a little bit more tricky. So it's really important that you look into the contracts and that you define what is really needed, especially on the deliverable side. And also that you never sign a contract, even if you're so smart at all, but don't sign it without a lawyer. It's really critical that a lawyer does a final contract parse. Because overall, the contract should cover the most important clauses. For example, it's the scope of work and especially your obligations as a developer, what you have to deliver. Also the payment, how is the payment structured? The change request and change order, which is most of the time missing completely in the contract, and we will go into this a little later. Also milestones and approvals, the scope of rights, and especially the source code, IP, warranties, and also the termination clauses. And as I said, scope of work is really critical, and we have seen contracts, and this is not a lie, which was really stated. The developer shall develop game as requested by publisher and provide the game currently titled My Game to publisher, and the game shall be excellent workmanship and in accordance with the highest international standard. This clause, or a clause similar like this, is a recipe for disaster, because what does that mean? What is highest international standard? What has I to deliver as a developer in the end? So basically, the contract on the scope of work side, it's an excellent definition of the public obligations, and you need to write down what shall I really deliver, and what does the developer have to put on in detail on every single milestone. And you should also add the game design document as an amendment to your contract, and if it's not ready for when you're signing the contract, put it in at the end of the pre-production at the latest. The next topic, which is also really important, it's the payment. It's not only how much money you will get, but it's basically structured how the money is defined. For example, when you're doing a free-to-play mobile game, it's very important that you define with your partner what does terms like gross revenue, net revenue really mean. Does it mean I'm getting the money before marketing expenses, or will user acquisition costs they reduced from the money I'm getting? And we also had, for example, developers who were not really asking for a rev share at all when it was a work for hire, for example. So what percentage are you really getting from the money when the game is out and during development? One point which is really important for us to tell you about, it's the change request or change order, because many contracts are not really covering it, and this is a high potential conflict point from a perspective, because there are always changes. There might be that at the end of pre-production you have a great idea, and when you start to flesh it out by coding, you would say from a game design perspective, this doesn't make sense, we want to change it. So you can't do this usually in a publisher relation by your own if you don't have asked when, for example, it is more costly or more time consuming. It might be also vice versa, that the publisher is reaching out to you and saying, we had this great idea, but maybe not so good. Couldn't we make something completely different? Or I would like to have this in addition. And for this one, it's important that you define a general clause in your contract how you handle change requests from both parties. And the best solution there is that everybody can make a change request, and then you sit together, and as a developer, you give the change request to your project lead, you make an estimation, you tell the publisher upfront, okay, if we do this change, it will have effect on time, costs, whatever, and then in the end, everybody agrees, especially the publisher who's giving you the money, yes, let's do this. And you also should get a signed-off version that you're really allowed to do the change. And the next topic is you again.
Thank you. The next one is, and that kind of like goes along with a lot of the things Vera said before, is the milestone itself. So things you definitely need to define in the contract is, first of all, how a milestone gets delivered, who at the publisher side needs to approve it. One of the most important thing is how much time does the publisher has to approve the milestone. Usually it's something like 10 to 15 workdays maybe, but there should be definitely a number in there. And along with that, there should be also a clause saying what happens if the publisher does not react. Because ideally, you as a developer, you want a clause that if publisher does not react within 10 days, milestone is automatically approved. Otherwise, you're in a limbo. Because otherwise, publisher says after 15 or 20 days, yeah, we still need some time. And in a worst case scenario, milestone is linked to a payment and you wait for the payment and then you wait forever, but you have no leverage to go to court or to put any pressure on the publisher saying, look guys, we stop working because if you're not paying us, because they're still kind of like in an approval phase of the milestone. Because there was a period defined in the contract maybe, how long the publisher has to do so, but if there is no consequence, if he does not do, then the other clause or the time actually is pretty much worthless. Also, you need to define in this clause, or generally in the contract about milestones, what happens if the publisher rejects. So is there kind of like, do you have a certain amount of time to kind of like remedy the things he's claiming that are not in it there or whatever? But again, this needs to be a very specific definition of how to handle the whole milestone process. And that's why Vera said rightfully, this is something even, I mean, I probably during my 25 years, I've dealt with more than 60, 70 contracts in my life. I would never do a contract, even with 60, 70 contracts as an experience, without a lawyer. Because sometimes it's really just one or two words that make such a great difference. And if you're not a lawyer and you think, yeah, that reads fine, I understand it, it might be not what it's actually saying there. The other thing I just mentioned, which is also a potential area of constant discussion and conflict, is when the milestone is linked to the payment. Many publishers do that. They're kind of like, you want monthly milestones because you as a developer need to pay your development team monthly salaries, obviously. So I want from you monthly milestones, if you want monthly payments. First of all, if you look into project planning and look about or think about the meaning of milestone, a milestone should be really something like the word itself, it says, something meaningful. It needs to be measurable. Ideally, it's a set of feature that you can give to QA and say, QA, can you look into this? And is this something that is really there and as designed in the design document? And can we approve it or not? I give you a typical example, something like 50% pathfinding is done is not a milestone definition. Because what is 50% pathfinding done? If I as a publisher get a milestone where the developer tells me one of the deliverables is 50% pathfinding done, how shall I measure it? Is it that the units just walk to the half of the screen and then stop? Or can they walk around but still run into every obstacle? Or what is meant with that? So it's very important that you're very precise with that. So the question is, when you think about a milestone and say, sometimes it might be from a project planning perspective better that the next milestone might be in 6 weeks. This milestone might be there already after 3 weeks, but you cannot really plan that every 4 weeks you have something meaningful and measurable as a milestone necessarily. Then the question is, how do you do that? How do you deal with that when the publisher wants to link the milestone with the payment? What we usually do, and what I always recommend, or we recommend, and what we already did back in the times when I was at Infogram, is that it's simply the developer has to deliver milestones. There is a milestone schedule. Those milestones do not necessarily need to be monthly. They might be 3 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 week based, whatever it makes sense. But I rather, as a publisher, want to have a measurable milestone. And then there are monthly payments. And then there is a clause, if the developer fails to deliver the next milestone, or I don't know, he needs to fix stuff or things like that, I can just stop the payment or part of the payment. So you kind of like de-link milestone delivery with payment. This is really something I can recommend, and most publishers, once they understand what that means, are actually quite open to that, if they're smart enough. But then again, you want to deal with smart publishers and not with stupid publishers, right? Next one is source code. That's I can kind of like make this one a little shorter. This is something your lawyer, because these are kind of like standard clauses, usually can tell you. This is like who owns the source code. Normally, if you develop a game, it's a standard clause that the publisher licensed the right for the source code for this specific game. But obviously, you want to make sure that he doesn't take the source code and then make other games with your source code as well, because this would be more kind of like an engine licensing deal. So this is pretty straightforward. The next one is basically also pretty straightforward. The question is only who gets what. So this is the IP. Publishers always want to own an IP, because in the long run, this is, if the game suddenly gets huge and very big and the greatest success in the world, he obviously wants to make sequels and stuff like that and cash out even more. And so he wants to have the license or the brand for himself. On the other hand, if the developer had the idea, obviously the developer also wants to own the IP. The normal situation is if the publisher pays the whole development, you're not in a good spot as a developer to ask for the IP. Most publishers will say, well, I have the full risk, I pay the full money, I get the IP. If you have already invested something and it's kind of like a co-publishing deal, or you bring some money to the table, you obviously have better cards. What you can always try at least is a kind of like a first option, right? And this could be either that the publisher owns the IP, but if he does a sequel, he first or last needs to get to you after you've talked to other developers, and you can try to match other kind of like offers from other developers. And if you're kind of like in the same league, then you get also the right for the sequel. Or vice versa, if you still own the IP, you might be willing to say to the publisher, okay, you have a first or last matching right. So for the next game, I will go to talk to other publishers, but in the end, I will also get to you, and you can also give me an offer, and if it matches the others, I will do the next game also with you. But again, IP is really about who has the leverage, and this is usually about who pays most of the development fee in the end. Next one, also something I would really do with the lawyers, because they are very experienced with these kind of tricky things. The warranty. So the most important thing to look into here, especially for European developers, is if you're dealing with an overseas publisher, they might put a warranty for all patents in there. And I tell you what, the patent right in the United States is a mess. And actually, to kind of like cover that, you would just need a patent lawyer just for the United States to say, yes, I guarantee you that there are no kind of like patents heard in the United States. Because you may have heard of that. I even had some encounters. There are these kind of like patent trolls in the United States that just look at games and stuff and say, oh, here's a patent that was heard, and they send you kind of like an invoice of $10,000. So better check this with your lawyer, and also ultimately make sure you put only in warranties where you can say, yes, I can guarantee and make sure that I'm not hurting any rights of any third party. Next one is termination. So what does the contract say about when you kind of like want to divide with the publisher for whatever reason, or the publisher wants to divide with you? One of the typical clauses when I'm on the publisher side, always put in is a termination clause that I as a publisher have the right at the end of pre-production to ultimately decide again and say no. Because in the end, this is what a pre-production is for. Because at the pitch phase, the developer, the publisher, everyone might have a feeling of, this should be the game, and this might be the budget for it and everything, but until you haven't made the full pre-production with the full game design, with the full planning, you do not know for sure. Also in the pre-production, when I'm the publisher, I start kind of like focus group tests, look into the market. Is the market really big enough? What are we talking about? Make a business forecast. So only at the end of pre-production, both sides ultimately, ideally, but that's what it's for, know how much it will cost, what kind of game everyone will get. There will be prototypes and everything. So that's why normally I always put in a termination clause at the end of the pre-production. After that, it should be only when you're in breach as a developer. So if you're not delivering the milestone on time and you do not manage to kind of like fix the problems within a certain period, the publisher usually gets the right to terminate the contract. Other kind of like, sometimes publishers have this, they have the right to always cancel the contract. That's very risky, because as a developer, you're always in a situation that even, I don't know, 2 weeks before master, a publisher can say, you know what, screw that. So I would be very careful with that. If this is a case, and even if this is not the case, but just with the clause I just mentioned with the end of pre-production right to cancel, try at least to kind of like negotiate a kill fee in. Because let's take the example, end of pre-production, publisher says at the end of pre-production, I can kill the project. You're in good faith and you think you're doing a great job in the pre-production, but at the end the publisher just say no. If you don't have kind of like a kill fee or anything like that, and you don't have any further runway as a developer, you're suddenly from one day to another without a project and without any income. So try to at least get a clause in saying if the publisher cancels the deal, you get another month, or ideally maybe even 2 months of payment no matter what. Because otherwise you're in a very insecure situation. And back to my lovely fiancée.
All right, so how to deal with this situation, especially if it comes to change requests. And what we are saying, proper project planning is your sharpest knife to deal with a publisher, because you can only protect yourself if you really know, okay, this is what we are going to plan. It takes such a time, so many resources, and especially when the publisher then comes to you and say, we would like to have this feature XYZ completely different. You can put it into your current measures and say, look, publisher, you know, these are our people, and if we change the feature like this, it will take up this time in advance and it will cost more. And if you don't have a proper and precise planning, you will always have to argue, because most of the publishers, like Ralf said earlier today, have the tendency, what can I get more without paying for it? So basically, project planning is one of the most critical things, and the final project plan should always be, at the end of pre-production, an amendment to your contract as well, because once this is agreed, you can always say, okay, based on this amount of budget, we would like to have the defined outcome of the game, and then we decide on the different changes separately. The next topic is communication. Your master at the publisher is the producer, and each publisher is usually doing a studio due diligence. So why are not you are going there and doing a publisher due diligence? I have not seen a lot of developers really making right of this because it helps a lot to see who are the people I'm dealing with in the future, who will be my main contact people at the publisher, and who is also my producer. And more experienced teams we have already seen had clauses in their contract that they have a veto right. For example, during development you see, okay, the producer I'm having there is not reacting on my emails, he's very slow, he's not giving me the information I really need. So you should have the right to say, please publisher, can we have another person on the project? Because he is the master of your title within the full publisher environment. A next topic which is really important on the communication, I know instant messengers are quite common and spread, and they're convenient for daily communication. But when it comes to contract and also protecting yourself, it's really, really important that you make anything what is directly project related and change related in written, so in email. Don't rely on Slack, Skype, Discord, whatever, because they have no relevance when going in front of court. And in addition, it also has a problem when you're looking for something, because you have the chat flow, but if you have 5 months later a discussion where the publisher said, oh, I understood this completely different, and you say, no, we have discussed it here somewhere 5 months ago, it will be hard to find the right path in the different instant messenger channels. So always do it in writing. Meeting minutes. Also something which are not so handy. It takes someone really looking and writing the stuff down, what has to be discussed, but it's also important for you to make sure that you're all on the same page. So every meeting you're having with a third-party publisher or investor, you should write down at least the essentials. What has been discussed? What was the decision out of it? And also, what are the next action points and who is responsible for these action points? Because if you don't have this, it can easily result into, oh, I thought you were responsible for this, or I was waiting on this. So, and in the end, when you have written a written document, it really counts in front of court. And on the other hand, you can send it around to the full group of people who were attending the meeting, and you can make sure that everybody has read it. It's not necessary that you send around the meeting notes and then tell the people, have you read my email? This is not necessary. So in the case nobody is reacting, you can say, okay, they understood what I have written down, they all agree, that's fine, but you need a written piece of paper on this one. And the next one is firefighting measures.
Yep. So now we're well prepared, the contract is fine, we did our best, chose our publisher producer, but still things can go wrong. And now we'd like to look with you into some of the things you can do if publisher's not paying or whatever. So first of all, some kind of like general rules of conduct, how to behave generally in any kind of like collaboration. Always react immediately when there is a conflict. Don't go like, nah, the publisher kind of like hinted me that he might be unhappy with the next milestone and that he has already some early feedback from QA and they don't think it's good, whatever. Instantly jump on it and try to pick up the phone or ping him with an email and say, can we talk about that? Never let kind of like a conflict, you know, slowly get bigger and bigger and suddenly if the fire is so big that you cannot extinguish it anymore. The next thing is when you realize, for example, publisher's not paying you, or you say, if I don't approve the milestone, or look, this is a grave situation and we need to talk and we're not sure whether we want to continue with you guys. This is the other situation where you should instantly, without any further hesitation, go to your lawyer again. So it's always like, in the beginning, you need the lawyer for the contract, and then when something kind of like is starting to escalate that may end up in court. You do not necessarily need to tell the publisher already, because this might be kind of like already kind of like a sign like, yeah, I'm willing to fight, and then he might already kind of like instantly call his lawyers, and then suddenly you have an escalation that you don't want. So you're not kind of like forced or obliged to tell him, but you should go to your lawyer and say, this is the situation, how shall I react? What shall I do? What shall I not do? Because your lawyer will instantly tell you how to kind of like structure the further communication to be on the safe side, to not kind of like give in or make any false promises or stuff like that. Again, this is really worth the money. So don't shy away of saying, oh, lawyer is too costly, I can deal the situation by myself. What Vera said before, that kind of like you should always take meeting minutes when talking to the publisher, when decisions are made. Now it's even more important. Now it's crucial because all those meeting reports and everything in the end will go to court. They will be the basis of when there's kind of like a discussion whether a milestone was met or not, or whether the publisher kind of like did not fulfill his part of the contract or the developer. You need to protect yourself, and the only way to protect yourself is with written documents in such a case. Still, you want to be constructive, so even if you do all these kind of like preparations and maybe talk in the background already with the publisher, the first most important and most obvious thing is actually try to go to the publisher and try to find a peaceful solution. So maybe it's just a misunderstanding. Maybe the publisher is rejecting your milestone just because for the wrong reasons, or because he didn't understand something, or very often conflicts do not occur because one side is bad or kind of like has bad intentions. Very frequently, or part of the job when we get hired is usually kind of like these firefighting situations. Oh, we're doomed, the publisher's not paying us, whatever. And the first thing we do is try to get all people at one table and try to carve out the situation. What is the problem actually? So why are we having these kind of like different views on a thing, and maybe we can solve it in a peaceful way. So obviously this should be always kind of like the first thing you should do. And in the situation and in this whole kind of like once the shit has hit the fan reaction, always take at least towards the publisher, but also towards your team, very important. So if you kind of like feel I would like to scream around, just go in a room for yourself, and so that nobody can hear you. But never get emotional, never show emotions, or kind of like act like a child that got hurt or something like that. And also, very important, never show any signs of weakness. We had that also, that then developer fall into this mode, kind of like, publisher's not paying me, and then you go to the publisher, oh, please publisher, if you're not paying me, I go busted, and it's such a bad situation, stuff like that. Never do that. Never show that you're with the back against the wall, even if you are, because then the publisher will try to make the best out of the situation for him. Because in the end, ultimately, he wants to make business, and the more he gets on the winning side, the better for him. Someone puts that in a very great way. It's just a business and nothing personal, like the Godfather once said. So always try to take it with that perspective. One thing we already talked a bit about, because it should be in the contract already, and now you see why it's so important, is the change request. So one of the typical conflict field is that the publisher comes along and say, oh, we just came back from E3 and we saw this other game and this has this cool feature, and you need to put this feature as well in your game. But extra money, no, you need to do it within the given parameters. And then, like Vera said, only if you have a plan, you can say, look, publisher, we made a reasonable plan, you know this plan, you agreed to it. And look now, we changed here in the plan, it takes extra 4 weeks. Oh, look, suddenly our budget changes. How shall we cover that? There is no way to do it. Milestone rejection. One of the most common reason, and I've mentioned it earlier when we were talking about milestones in contract before, is that the milestone is not defined clearly enough. And many developers have the assumption that I should kind of like keep the milestone as vague and fuzzy as possible because it's always in my advantage, because I can always deliver anything to the publisher and say, this is what's in the milestone here. It's like, says 20% of the game complete. This is 20% of the game. Prove me wrong. But again, this is kind of like, you don't have the money, the publisher has the money. And if the publisher says, no, I don't prove you wrong, you prove me wrong, and I sit it out and we can go to court, what do you want to do? You're not getting the money, you cannot pay your salaries. So it's always in your best interest that you are as precise as possible so that the publisher could never say, look, you promised me something, but I don't see it here in this milestone. It's not there. And creating measurable milestone is hard. It's not easy, but it is doable. Would be actually a good talk maybe for next year's 4C. This is just a talk on its own. How to create milestones that are really measurable and where both parties kind of like understand, okay, we're getting this and we're getting it then, and it should do this and this and that. That's why I said before, for maybe just as a rule of thumb or as a kind of like to simplify it. For me, a milestone is always a set of feature in a game that I can give to the QA together with the design documents that describe what these features should do. The QA can play it and say it does what it says in the design. This for me is a milestone. That's why something like, I don't know, 70% pathfinding or 30% of the animation done or stuff like that is not really measurable or quantifiable. The hardest part with milestone is always the quality. So even if everything is there and the QA says, yes, it's there, but this part of, but it's not fun or it's not looking good or stuff like that is always kind of like a bit tricky. But again, even there are ways to kind of like make it measurable. We had back at Infogram what we call the quality matrix, where we described every feature and compared it, for example, to similar feature in other games and said it should be like in this game, but just with that, or like in this game, but just like that. Try to make it as transparent and understandable as possible for all sides, that everyone has really the same alignment and the same understanding of what the milestone ultimately will be and will look like. And one other note I have here, at the very bottom of this slide is also important. This is, again, it's possible, but it's particularly hard if you're working more in an agile development. If you're working with Scrum, is every sprint then automatically a milestone, or do you combine several sprints to a milestone? And how do you handle the backlog that in agile can change all the time? And who's the product owner and stuff like that? Again, it's possible. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's even harder the more agile you are. And in our experience, it's always funny. Publishers are always like, agile is great, as long as their developers don't do it. Because as soon as one of their developers start, I want to do agile. Yeah, but when do I know what I get exactly and defined and I need my deadlines and everything? And then suddenly a publisher doesn't like agile anymore. So it's very interesting to kind of like observe. But again, it's not always the bad publisher, and this whole talk is not about publishers are evil and you need to protect yourself and need to screw them up. No, it's really about partnership, collaboration. And in a partnership, in a collaboration, both sides can fuck up, and obviously you all never be late and you had never had development slippage, I know that, but sometimes there are some developers out there that cannot hold their deadlines, so sometimes they might be a bit delayed. So what to do then? Again, first rule, especially I kind of like stress it out, it's a partnership. So like in a true partnership, and it's the same thing you would expect from the publisher if he screws up. You want him also to be transparent, to be honest about it, to bring it on the table as soon as he or you realizes. This is one of the big mistakes we frequently see with developers. They know, let's say they have a 6-week milestone. They already know in week 2 they will never make the milestone. They wait until the very last day and then tell the publisher, oh, sorry, we need 3 more weeks. That's when I get pissed when I'm the publisher producer. First of all, I would get pissed because I would have not realized earlier, and this would be my fault, obviously. But if a development team is trying to hide things until the very last day and then suddenly everything explodes, that's very bad. Because maybe in the 2nd week, we could have already sit together, I as the publisher producer and you as the development studio, and would have found a way. Just cut a feature or whatever, or make it differently, or say, okay, it takes longer, then we push some stuff to the next milestone. If you approach me the very last day at the end, before the end of the milestone, that's bad. Never do that. So be transparent, be honest. Slippage can happen in a game development, as we all know, in a game development situation. How to deal with that? Well, first of all, you could try to get the feature, if you see, and it goes a bit to what Matthias said, sometimes suck with pride. Sometimes a feature does not need this perfect kind of level of polish. You just deliver it and it's good enough. And then, if the publisher says, yeah, but you know what, can we do that can't we do that a bit more, more shiny, put in more magic? Then you can always say, yeah, we thought about this as well. Let's make this a change request, and we take some more time and some more budget, and we make it even better. That's a good way of doing it. The other thing, and that's the obvious thing to do, is if you're slipping, hopefully you kind of like made your whole planning in a way that you have must-have feature, should-have feature, and nice-to-have feature. And also, hopefully, you've started with the must-have features, not the nice-to-have features in the development. Because then you can always say, and this is also, it should be already in the contract, nice-to-have features are what they are named for. You can cut them out. So if you see, we're slipping, this feature takes longer, you can go to the publisher and say, but we both agreed that we also have nice-to-have feature. We would suggest we throw these features out and take this extra time to get this thing done. This is what you do in game development, actually, and this is why you do actually also project planning. Because project plan is not that you at one day have kind of like a plan for the next 2 years and know exactly when which feature will be done and at what exact day you will release exactly this kind of like scope you defined, but it's really about planning, executing, and when you execute, always check, am I still in my plan? If not, what kind of actions do I need to do? Do I need to cut features? Do I need to put more resources on it, etc.? Another thing, and publishers obviously don't like to hear that, but it's true, the later you're in development, obviously the more reluctant the publisher is to kill the game, because he spent already so much money. So obviously the risk is higher if you already screw up very early in the beginning that the publishers say, yeah, whatever, we kill it, rather than if you're kind of like a couple of months away only from the gold master or from the soft launch or whatever. Still, this is not kind of like a guarantee. Some developers tend to say there's always this point of no return, and after that you can do whatever, because the publisher will always continue to pay. Not with a good, strong publisher. We even killed games 2 weeks before soft launch. For certain reasons, publishers we work. So it's not a guarantee, but obviously it's kind of like a rule of thumb that the risk gets lower the farther ahead you are and the more money the publisher has spent. For the obvious reasons that the publisher doesn't want to sign the money off. Then I think that's last but not least, kind of like the more, how do you say that, the more lawyer stuff again, or the more contractual things, always keep your period. So for example, if the publisher is late with a payment or doesn't answer on your milestone delivery or whatever, there are kind of like contractual obligation where you first have to remind them. Again, if you don't do that, you will have a hard time going to court, because the judge will tell you never reminded the publisher that he needs to deliver something to you. And there's always kind of, especially even in Germany, there are even kind of like these periods, even if they're not in the contract. I don't know how this might differ in certain countries, but usually I guess the chances are quite high that you have at least need to give some warnings up front. Sometimes it may all fall apart and you may split up with the publisher. We also had these situations where the publisher then say, no, I don't want that anymore, go away. You can even keep the game, whatever. Sometimes developers even kind of like at a certain point start to enforce the situation, or kind of like really working towards a split because they say, we would be better off with another publisher. Don't underestimate that. Even if the publisher says, you know what, we draw the line here, you keep the game, or whatever state the game is in right now, you don't need to pay us anything back until you find another publisher, by the way. You always need to pay back the money if you find another publisher. But for now, you don't need to pay us anything back. It's very hard, or it's not easy, to then go to another publisher and say, look, we already have this game here in development and it's already playable and whatever, and think you get a contract tomorrow. Because new publishers, first of all, will be suspicious. Why did these guys put up with the other publisher? And then they will do some research, first of all. And this whole kind of like, even though you have something maybe very advanced in production, this whole new process is like pitching your game again from scratch, and it may take another 6 to 9 months again to sign another contract with a publisher. So developers usually have this kind of like false assumption, okay, if everything goes wrong, I just take my game and give it to another publisher, and the next month this publisher continues to pay me. You need to have a certain runway, and sometimes it doesn't even work out, even if you have something already very advanced. We've had a lot of kind of like studios we know where they had something really, really good and they were trying to shop it around and no other publisher was touching it for various reasons. The very last, but not least, kind of like action that you always should do is the minute publisher stops paying you for whatever reason, or there's a conflict or whatever, stop working. First of all, reminder period, you cannot stop working instantly. So you need to kind of like say, hey, publisher, you owe us money, blah, 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 for these reasons. Again, check with your lawyer. But then if he doesn't answer on that one, stop working and tell the publisher that you stop working, because this is something a publisher is always afraid of. So it's the kind of like ultima ratio. Again, it's obviously harder if you're a very small studio, because if the publisher knows that you're a one-project studio, he has a way higher leverage, because he knows you can't take the resources and put them on another project. If you're a mid-sized or bigger studio and you have certain projects in parallel, you can always tell the publisher, you know what, fuck you, you're not paying me, I take these resources and put it on this project, and I'm even faster there, and this client will be even more happy. Hopefully it's not the same publisher, then it doesn't work, obviously. But if you're just a small indie developer or just a small one-project studio, you can tell the publisher, I stopped working and send my people home, but that's kind of like he knows, yeah, you can only do that for a couple of weeks maximum, and then, yeah. But always remember this nice young lady, when you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die, there is no middle ground. So at a certain point, you need to draw the line and say, we stop here. So, I hope no one has fallen asleep, like these guys. So, we have some time left for question and answers. First of all, thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much.
So, questions?
So we have time left just for maybe 1 or 2 questions. Guys, anyone? Really, don't let them go that easily.
It's, by the way, please, if you suddenly have later, oh, I should have thought about that, you can always write us an email. We're always happy to answer. You can also see our websites here. And together we run another website that might be interesting for you, www.gameproducersguide.com. This is where actually you will also find this talk later, so we'll put the slides on that. But there are also slides from other talks we gave and potentially interesting articles about game production. So
and templates. So for example, if you're looking for a meeting note template, it's also uploaded there.
There are no contract templates, I must say that. This is for different reasons. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.